Hello, everyone. Hello. Are you cold? I'm sorry. I have absolutely no control over this. I could remove my jacket as a gesture of empathy. Good. I don't really want to remove my jacket. It's the only thing holding the microphone up. All right, here's the deal. We are here today to talk about governing business processes. My name is Mike Fitzmaurice. I'm Nintex's Vice President of Product Technology, Workflow Technology, sorry. And with me is my esteemed colleague, Gonzalo Marcos, who is a technical evangelist based out of the EMEA region.
Hello, everyone.
And here's the strange thing. You have been with Nintex. I've been with Nintex for almost a decade at this point. And I was with Microsoft for more than a decade prior to that, working on SharePoint and so on. But Gonzalo, you did SharePoint consulting in a past life, and you've been with Nintex for a little over a year now, right?
Yeah, like 15 months.
Here's the thing that I find. I didn't hear about this until a couple of months ago, but apparently he gets teased by his colleagues in the London office because they think he looks like me, like a...
Well, not like you, like a younger version.
Like a younger version of me. Yes. But yeah, you've got the facial features, the beard, the glasses, yeah, he doesn't have the gray hair yet, but that won't last.
I'm starting now.
Yeah, you're starting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Totally.
We did this presentation actually in Vienna back in November, and you even wore a kilt.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
It was fun.
Yes. And in fact, you won money for that because people didn't believe you would do it.
Do you remember the thing that I told you that we shouldn't say in the...
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing that we shouldn't say about
That's
the
okay, that's fine. Now, we actually have a very nice advantage doing this presentation here at InspireX. When we did the presentation at a SharePoint event, we had to be nice and product neutral, and we love everybody. Here we actually get to show you a couple of things involving Nintex technology. So we get to do a couple of demos that we weren't able to do elsewhere. But the thing we want to do most is to sell you on an idea. We want to take you on a journey because you're going to portray me from 15, 20 years ago, something like that?
Yeah, I'm going to be you in the past.
Okay, and I'll be him in the future. And the point,
you will be you.
I will be me. Okay, whatever. The point is, well, me in the future is you, right? But the point is, what we're going to do is governance as we thought it would work, governance as we have learned it needs to work. And so we'll talk about different approaches to governance. And what I am shamelessly going to try to do is to sell you on an idea of how to govern. And how not to govern. And you're going to drive that point home by being a person starting out thinking it works one way, and then I'll be the world-weary, frazzled person that says, it didn't work out that way, it wound up working this way instead. Excellent. And we'll show you examples of things. So, yes, you I think want to start with this one, right? So what is governance, sir?
Yeah. So let's pretend for a moment that I'm Mike in the past, 15 years ago. More or less, and let's imagine that I need to create and I need to bring some governance to my SharePoint environment in this case. So where to start? Well, we can start with a definition, or at least what we think we need to do. If we talk about governance, first of all, governance is expectations. So why did we decide to use SharePoint as the collaboration platform? And when talking about business process automation, why did we decide to use Nintex as the workflow solution platform? There must be a reason. It's not only because SharePoint and Nintex, it works very, very well. There has to be a reason. So everyone in the organization, at some point, they have their expectations about the SharePoint platform and the workflow solution. Governance is also roles and responsibilities. We will talk about it later, but it's very important that we can identify the responsible of every piece of information or the responsible of every process in our organization. This is not necessarily the IT department. We will talk about it later, but when we talk about processes, when we talk about information, IT is not responsible of everything, so we need to identify who is responsible of what. Because these people who are responsible of a business department or a business unit, these people, they have their expectations and they know how the process should go, what the process look like. And based on these expectations, they will create their own rules, their own policies, in other words, how things should be done. This is more or less a theory, expectations, roles and responsibilities and policies. We can use these three concepts to define the governance, but if we need to put the governance plan in practice, we need to automate it. And the way to automate it is identifying all the activities around governance and put a process on that and automate it. That's how we can more or less define governance 15 years ago from the very beginning.
Actually, if you want to, you could even define it that way today. My complaint is not that this is old, it's that this is sterile, and it seems to be obsessed with enforcement. I know you said it doesn't have to be IT, but it feels like IT telling everybody what to do. In fact, more to the point, it seems like that definition means that governance equals the art of being mean. I'm seeing some of you nod. I want to say that I've tried governing the way earlier me has tried to govern, and it involves revolts, it involves people like not paying it. They either actively revolt or they just ignore it, or failures happen left and right. And that's not because people are bad. It's because people are people and organizations are organizations, and we need to come up with a way to do governance that works with human nature instead of working against it. And being mean doesn't lead to success, not nearly compared to being helpful. So if you are, the impression is if you're going to govern, you're in the no business. You want to stop people from doing bad things. To really, really govern in a way that lasts, that works, you need to be in the business of saying yes. I might say yes to him. I might say yes to you. I'm not going to say no to you, sir, but if you're doing something that's just insane, jaw-dropping strange, I just might not say yes. And we'll get around to it, and I will try to encourage you to do something that we think is saner, but me saying no and then not saying no to you two, not nearly as effective. That's all I'm getting at.
Exactly. So when it comes to business process automation, what is governance?
Yes. What is business process governance? You have, you've nicely, well, these aren't formal categories, right?
Yeah, I thought it would be a good idea rather than just thinking and rethinking another definition. I thought it would be a good idea if we just consider all the elements that we should take into consideration when we are defining a governance plan.
Okay, that's fair enough. So these are more like anchors for ideas. They're not exhaustive, mutually exclusive categories.
Yeah, there could be more, there could be less.
Okay,
but,
that's fine.
That's our classification.
No, it actually makes sense because as we talk about these things, some of the stuff we mention in terms of assets might show up under design standards and so on, but these are 10 rallying points, and we're going to do them one at a time. And in fact, we're going to see to it that each of them takes roughly 4 minutes or so, and then we'll all finish on time and get out of here and go to the reception. So that's the plan, at least.
Exactly.
Yes. Exactly. We're going to try very hard not to go long.
What we will do with every single element, we will try to bring what we thought It was a good idea in terms of governance 15 years ago. I will explain that. And
50?
15.
Oh, 15. Okay, fine. I'm not that old. I'm old, but I'm not that old.
No, basically SharePoint
Yeah,
didn't exist.
I know. Yes.
Okay. Let's start with security.
Ah, yes.
Well, it's a big topic for governance. So back in those times, 15 years ago, when we started with SharePoint as the collaboration platform, Nintex as the workflow platform on top of SharePoint, everything was great. I mean, it seems like there was the perfect combination to bring processes to a collaboration platform. The problem or the thing is that SharePoint was designed to be a decentralized platform, which is a good idea, in which in this platform everyone can create a list, a SharePoint site. With Nintex you can create easily a workflow. You don't need to be an IT expert to create a workflow. So everybody can use the platform and the workflow solution. But the problem is that soon afterwards, it was out of control. We have people creating workflows everywhere. We have people creating lists. We have thousands of workflows. Most of them are repeated workflows with bad designs. So it was out of control. So back in those times, the approach from the security perspective was to put IT in control of everything. It was going to be IT controlling the permissions, the accesses to all the resources, more or less controlling every single activity around workflows and SharePoint platforms.
In past lives, did any of you guys ever use SharePoint Designer? Or did any of you ever work in a place that deliberately turned off the use of SharePoint Designer because it meant chaos? Yeah. Well, we didn't want that to happen at Nintex. And it turns out that when we built the feature, we were still in the no business, but it turns out that the features we're talking about work pretty well, even if you want to be in the yes business. So here's what I mean by this. Once upon a time, and you can still work this way, and in fact, to be perfectly honest, does anyone use Nintex in Office 365? All right, in 365, you cannot design a workflow unless you're a site administrator. However, the story on premises in Nintex Workflow for SharePoint Server and the medium-term goals for Nintex Workflow Cloud are to offer you a variety of tiers of functionality. So what are we looking at here? This is site settings, right?
Yeah, it was just to show
site?
that we can, for example, use
the allowed workflow designers group. This allows you to make sure that most people can't mess around inside of your site, but you still allow them to build processes on the assets that you have already created for them. So you could have your cake and eat it too, in the sense that people can build ad hoc workflows or read workflows or monitor the status of workflows, whatever it is you decide to do, but you don't have to give them all of it. So in other words, we can move people through tiers. In other words, we start off with you're not allowed to do anything, but if you come to us with a certain need and a certain aptitude, all right, we'll let you design workflows. We're still not going to let you administer the site. We're not going to allow you to change some of the other workflow-related settings here, but we'll let you build workflows on lists that you have permission to in this site and this site only. And this expands. Some of these permissions can be scoped to site collections. Some of them can be scoped to the entire farm. But the point is, we walk you through hoops so that gradually we can say yes more and more often. And in fact, it doesn't even need to be all or nothing. If you go to, you could do this here. Yeah, okay, this is at the farm level, but it could also be done at the site collection level and the site level. We can allow you to use certain actions and not others. Now, the page is refreshing, so just hang on. Okay, there we go. This is a list of all possible workflow actions, and by default, they're all turned on. But with one click, Gonzalo can turn them all off, and now you can go in and decide, either within the site for everybody using the site or the farm. Or on a user-by-user basis, you can tweak the permissions available to each of these workflow actions, which means I could say, you know, in this particular site, no one needs to access SQL data. No one needs to be calling web services. Nobody should be calling out to distributed workflow processes and so on. Or I might say, well, you can. You look like a responsible adult. Him, on the other hand, not so much. So I'll give you special powers because, again, you seem nice. So it can work like that. In fact, there are tools available in some, absolutely on premises, soon to be online, that allow you to take this kind of governance approach. It'll be on successive circles of you saying yes.
Exactly.
That works. Telling people, being in the no business, that's no fun. Being in the yes business, oh, that's a lot of fun. Assets.
Yep.
What do you think about governing assets, sir?
Well, what
15 years ago. Go ahead.
What I mean with assets is to have a full inventory of all the elements in the platform. And when it comes to governance of the business process automation, what I mean is to have at least a full inventory of all the data sources that we want to connect. If you think about it, when we are creating a workflow, basically what we are doing is we are trying to collect some information that it could be from the end user, or we can try to collect this information from somewhere. And this somewhere could be a CRM system, Salesforce, a custom database, somewhere else that is not SharePoint. Then we will take this information, we will manipulate this information, do some calculations, and as a result of that, we will write back this information to, again, somewhere else. So we need to find what is this somewhere else, what are these places, at least what do I have available. I need to know if I can connect to CRM or not. I need to know if I have actions or connections to, I don't know, to Salesforce, to Dropbox, OneDrive. I need to have this full inventory of that. And that's basically what we tried to do in the past. We tried to create this full inventory of data sources.
All right, I get that.
But
No, actually, I don't really have a but here. What I have instead, and that wasn't meant to be a double entendre, what I meant to do instead was to say it's not so much about governing the assets in terms of saying, I don't want you to get at it. You know, I don't want you to go near this database, or I don't want you to go near, I'm not picking on you, I know you won't be mad at me, so I'm pointing to you specifically. What I mean by this is it's not so much about locking down the data, or it can be, but it would be a shame if you did that, because a workflow is made out of lots and lots of moving parts. And denying you access to data is actually very, very tricky, because who here has ever secured an SQL Server database or an Oracle database? Anybody? Oh, several, more than I thought, but not that many. Here's the thing, it is possible, although I know very few people that do all this work, that go through and figure out what what you should grant access to or restrict access to on different tables or different views or different columns and so on in different tables, and come up with a, so often security is governed at the entire database level. And it's either you're in or you're not. And the expectation is you'll hit this database with the application that's been built to talk to it, or you won't. Which means we traditionally think about granting access to the asset. I don't want you to think about granting access to the asset. I want you to think about granting access to the logic, the process. In other words, I have no need to give you, sir, access to everything in our Salesforce environment. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create a connector in advance. And I'm going to have that connector only expose certain objects inside of Salesforce. And it'll allow you to read and write freely, and I'm going to give you access to that connector. So in other words, I've created an object I can secure permissions on that basically says you can get to Salesforce, but only to do this. And if it's not a data connector, it could actually be a set of sub-processes, user-defined actions, other workflows you can call as if they were web services. We can do this a couple of different ways. But rather than thinking of the unit of security as the asset itself, what I would rather say is, you know, I'm going to give you, I want you to be able to update telephone numbers for contacts for all of our sales leads. So I'm going to open the door to the server room and give you the entire access to everything in it. I don't think that's a good idea. But why don't I give you access to updating the phone numbers and nothing else? So why don't I create processes that sit in between you and the real asset I want to secure, and I secure it by not focusing on the asset I want you to get at. I give you the right to do the things to those assets that I want you to do, which means it becomes a whole lot more about securing access to processes or sub-processes and a whole lot less about securing access to data. I still relatively keep the data locked away. Now, what this does require, anyone ever write a workflow that talks to another workflow or use a UDA or have anything that involves a distributed process? Good, because that's really, really important if you want to make this work. And you, in fact, have got a couple of these things here, don't you? This is Nintex Workflow Cloud.
Yes, it is.
And you're looking at a bunch of connections in Nintex Workflow Cloud,
Yeah,
right?
more or less to follow the same philosophy.
Okay, cool. And we don't just do this in NWC, right? We actually do this on premises as well. We've had it for a while.
Yeah, basically the idea is to, following what you are saying, is to create this bunch of connectors. Mm-hmm. And not only that, for example, we can go to SharePoint on-prem, and from the connection manager, I can create a connection to say, for example, that I want to allow my end users to connect to DocuSign, to any other external system. Not only that, but I also can have the possibility, if I create a new connection, to say that this new connection is only be available for this group of users in, for example, this site. Mm-hmm. So we are securing the connection and we are securing the users.
Okay. There is, the one last thing to risk beating a horse to death. Securing the asset is not a horrible thing. I just think we can do better. One thing I must confess I find interesting about Microsoft Flow, for example, that their unit of security is the connector. In other words, you can get to that or you can't get to that. And they've classified some data sources or connectors as enterprise or social or so on, and you can have a rule set up to say data is not allowed to flow from enterprise to social, as an example. And again, if that works for you, fine. But I actually think that if you really want to focus on governance, why don't you create a sub-process that's, or a UDA or another workflow that says, you're allowed to transfer this enterprise data to that social media outlet, and I will allow you to use that subroutine inside of your workflows. We love securing processes. It's much better than securing assets. Yep. And now.
Oh, let me change.
Thank you. The next big category will be roles, sir. What do you have to say about roles 15 years ago?
Basically what I was mentioning in the always boring definition of governance, that we need to identify the responsible people in the organization. We need to find the responsible people for processes, for every piece of information. And the key thing is that these people must not be the IT department, simply because they don't know the processes. IT can be responsible of all the technical stuff, of all the technology, mm-hmm. But when it comes to processes, IT, they don't know how the process goes. They don't know if we are talking about a contract management process. They don't know who should approach this contract, who should be contacted in case this contract has been refused. They don't know the process. So we need to identify who is responsible for that process and involve them in the design of the process.
Here's the difficulty with that. Basically, what you're setting up is if you say only the people we trust the most can build the processes, and then they need to reach out to the users. You're basically saying we have technical people who build everything, and they need to validate everything with subject matter experts. This usually involves, I ask for this, you build this, and this is either not what I want, or you built exactly what I asked for, and it's still not what I want. I'm not assigning blame here, but we at Nintex do believe that it's a very good idea that the owner of the business problem can at least help be the owner of the business solution. And with the rise of something Gartner calls citizen development, it's not about the low-code, no-code tools, it's about the approach you take to using them. So in other words, I can't imagine now having a workflow project developed exclusively by IT. Typically, I actually might want the people that most want the solution to exist to help spearhead the actual effort. And IT, instead of having the techies build something and have the subject matter experts act as quality assurance, flip it. Yep. Let the people that own the problem build the solution and have the technical people do quality assurance on that to make sure they didn't do something crazy or stupid or irresponsible or risky. But at the very, very least, if you start with the people that own the problem owning the solution, whatever it is they build is likely going to address the actual problem they're feeling or the pain they're experiencing. It's going to be a collaborative effort. And yes, IT is going to guide making sure people build stuff that will work. But IT trying to understand every business unit's business model doesn't scale.
Yeah, exactly. Just to give you an example.
What do you got here?
More or less. What I have here is a simple workflow that probably has been more or less created by, let's say, a power user. Mm-hmm. And as you can see here, well, the workflow works fine, but seems to be a little bit sequential.
Okay.
Right? So this is a perfect example of what you are explaining.
This is the kind of workflow a citizen developer might have built.
Yeah, following, they know the process, so basically what they are doing is, I need to do this, then this, then this, then this. And basically, they are just dragging and dropping the actions and put it in practice.
So phase one, someone that understands their pain builds this.
Exactly.
In phase two, IT gets involved as part of the process of governing solutions. And again, it's not to say you can do this, you can't do that. You're building it with your own assets. It's to point out that, well, what if you need to go back earlier? Or what if it isn't a simple, normal, sequential flow, even though you were expecting it to work that way most of the time? Mm-hmm. Maybe we want to make this look like a state machine. Maybe we want to break it up into stages so that you can move back and forth among them more easily. But it's a coaching type approach. You are governing, but this beats the heck out of mandating all workflows will be state machines. That sounds kind of 1984-ish or, robotics-like or something like that. That's a fine example. I like that.
That's it, yeah.
Now, this kind of begs, we do all of this, and we talk about coming up with roles in IT helping with reviews, because we loves ourselves some reuse. And what do you think about?
Well, in terms of reuse, what I can say from the past is that this was one of the mistakes. Following the roles topic, when we realized that we need to involve the business owners of the process in the design of the workflows, we tried to have everyone in the business department to review every single workflow, which could work, but it's too much. We forgot to reuse the workflows. So we can have 10 departments creating the same workflow, and we are doing it in the right way because we are involving the business owner of the process. But the thing is that if we don't reuse the workflows that we are creating or the stuff that we are creating, we will be ending up just doing the same process once again.
Evolving forward from that, if you take the point of view that IT should review stuff, but not necessarily build everything for everyone, then IT probably has enough bandwidth to be aware of which workflow efforts have taken place within the organization. If you say IT builds everything and the users review it for goodness of fit, there'll never be enough time for them to keep up, and eventually it won't work. So if you flip it, IT as an organizer, as a coordinator, as a coach, probably has a sense of what's going on out there, at least within a certain degree. And if you do that, IT and only IT, or the consultants secured by IT and so on, or a council of workflow professionals that work together across the entire company looking at its interests. I don't so much care who that person is, or group of persons is. I care that they exist and that their job is to pay attention to what other people are doing. They are in a much better position to see that reuse takes place. And we like reuse for lots of reasons. It's a little bit about efficiency. So in other words, if you built something nice, you ought to be able to benefit from it. And you wouldn't necessarily think to share a solution you built to scratch a personal itch with an itch he's got, and that didn't come out right. But the key thing here is, far more importantly, you're not just reusing the asset. Remember, if we are the workflow guys, either the workflow professionals that help look after the company or the IT department that, among many other things, looks after workflows or checks them for technical goodness of fit, it means if you reuse something that he built, you're not just reusing his handiwork, you're reusing our review of his handiwork. So not only has it already been done, it's been already been done and certified, so to speak, to be good. It's certainly not do any damage or introduce extra risk or something to that effect. So we love reuse for a long list of reasons. Do you have something you want to?
Yeah, a couple of examples that we couldn't show at ESPC in November. Well, I think more or less you all know user-defined actions, which is just the ability of more or less to pack a set of actions that we can reuse in all of our workflows.
Who works with UDAs, by the way? Thank you. We like UDAs. We're coming up with something we like even more than UDAs, but UDAs have done a lot of good work for a lot of people for a long time.
Yeah. Or, for example,
we're sorry for the name. That's actually my fault, but.
It was you.
Yeah, it was me.
Okay.
As opposed to a code-based action, and all the things we wanted to use, like reusable workflows, that was a concept that was already taken by SharePoint Designer. We couldn't use it.
Okay. So here's another example, workflow templates.
Yeah.
So this is something that we can also use for reusing the stuff that we are doing. Mm-hmm. With that, let's go for the next one.
Constants, yes. Constants are an excellent vehicle for reuse. Constants and secured connections, which actually eliminate the need for some kinds of constants. But yes, we love constants. And in fact, delegating work to another workflow that you call as if it were a subroutine, whether you use the traditional start workflow action on premises or the start workflow action in 365, or you use external start and then call something as a web service, as we can do now with NWC. All of those work, all of those are reuse vehicles. You probably want to favor one technique over another as time goes by, and I do think that as time goes by, the NWC style thing where every workflow is published as a reusable service, and we just provide a catalog for you so you can mix and match, that would be, that's an end game we're likely to work towards unless market conditions suggest there's an even better way to make that work. Right now, we at least, you need to tell us the URL for the workflow, and once you tell us where it is, we can take it from there. We are working on being able to discover where they are, so you just have to point and choose. Do not ask me when that's going to happen. But yeah, that's the idea. We love reuse. And one of the vehicles for reuse And one of the motivators for this is something called business rules. If you heard the term before, if you work in the world of business process management, if you are formal BPM people, and if you are, you probably are paying for something a lot more expensive than Nintex. And you have projects that run for a lot longer than Nintex projects typically do. But this is almost like an academic discipline. But they have a concept of what they call a rules engine. And rule is maybe not the best term, because when I say rule, and I bet when you say rule, you think restriction. In other words, or mandatory requirement or something like that. When academics say rule, they mean process or logic or protocol or something like that. And so a business rule might be, let's see, you want to...
Can give you a couple of examples.
You can? Okay. Yeah, show me an example or two.
So, for example,
You've got a couple, don't you? Or...
Yeah, well, I have in my head, but...
Oh, no, what's the one in your head?
No, I can show you
or
is
something like that?
I can give you the examples, and I can give you how to bring this example to practice.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
So let's imagine that we are working in a...
You need to hit the button.
Yep. Let's imagine that we are working in a sales company.
There we go.
In every sales department, probably there should be a business rule that says every discount greater than, let's say, 10%, we need the approval of the manager or the VP of sales. That's a business rule, and that's something that we need to follow. Or another example I can give you, how to calculate the business days. I mean, in the company, we will have our calendar, and we will have some days that are holidays. So how can we calculate the business days when it comes to leave requests or sick leaves or all of these examples? And the way to do it could be, for example, using a UDA. If I go to our user-defined actions, rather than following what you are mentioning, that rule is a restriction, what we can do is don't say the word rule, just use an UDA, so that if at any point in our workflows we need to do some business day calculation, let's use the UDA, and that's it. So every time we need to do this operation, we will be using the UDA, and that's not a rule. Actually, it's a way to say, let's use this because it's already done.
And we use that rule all the time. So we might use it to calculate how many days to subtract from your available annual leave for vacation time. We might use it in terms of extending terms to a customer or something like that, paying us on credit. So in other words, you've got 90 business days to pay us off after we issue you an invoice. In which case, calculating how we calculate those business days matters quite a bit. But we might reuse this over and over again. In fact, maybe a formula might be a good way to put it. Or
yeah, even checking the department or just the office in which you are located. For example, you are located in the Seattle office, and I'm in the London office. So the number of holidays are different.
Correct.
The days, the bank holidays are different. So with this UDA,
this could be clever enough to make sure that it works. And again, it doesn't have to be a UDA. It could be a workflow called via an endpoint using an external start. The main thing is, there's nothing magical about rules. They're just workflows that get reused frequently by other workflows. And they're basically built not so much to stand alone, but exclusively to be used over and over again inside other processes. That's the main thing there.
Exactly.
Promotion.
Well, promotion is just a way to encourage people to use what it really works in our organization. So, for example, if I am creating a nice workflow to go through my travel requests in my department, what I will try to do is to have a repository in which I can share this workflow, like the workflow templates that we have seen before, so that in your department, Mike, you can use the same workflow. That's a way to promote what is really working in our company.
Okay. But you're kind of saying, and again, 15 years ago, I probably would have believed this, that if you built something that was awesome, If you build it, they will come.
Yes.
And you build a great calculator for business days, everybody's going to want that. And what I would say is everybody out there does not care about what it is you just did until we help get them to care. I'm not disparaging your work. I'm a fan of your work. But he doesn't even know you exist, let alone know that you built something he could use, let alone that he could use it, let alone whether it's good and what the payoff is for reusing it rather than building it himself. That requires governance. That requires governance, again, not being in the business of saying no, but in the business of saying, hey, everybody, use this thing. So believe it or not, you need to use marketing and advertising and promotion and evangelism techniques within your organization in order to get people to the yes that you want them to get. Because the alternative will be a whole bunch of people doing things you want to say no to, but again, every time you say no, you risk a revolt, or you risk being ignored, or you risk the budget being diverted elsewhere because you say no all the time. So if I know that you've got a fantastic thing for calculating number of business days, and if I know that you've got a fantastic technique for figuring out what the discount rate ought to be for a business opportunity based on size of the account, frequency of orders, how desperate we are at that particular quarter, any of a number of other things, I probably want everyone else to know about it, especially if we are a distributed organization with offices in different parts of the world. And I want everybody to know what you're doing, everybody to know what he's doing, everybody to know what you're doing. There are clever people out here. We actually want to be not just a coach helping you build the right things, but a cheerleader to make sure they, in the back that are too cool to be up here, that we want them to be using your stuff. Now, even if you don't get thanked, although if we can come up with a reward or something for it, we might want to do that too. But we want everybody to know that it exists and it actually is done the way we want everybody to do it. And it's really easy to do, and it'll save you time in your own projects. And that's what we mean by promotion being a part of governance. Cool. By the way, here's the hard part to this, because you would think it's easy to yell from treetops about how good somebody's stuff is. You might say that might not work. I'll tell you it actually has worked. Does anyone here use SAP? Then it's worked. Okay, at least for you two. Here's why. Is everyone here aware of what SAP is? Just general nods would be useful here. Here's the thing about SAP. SAP is predicated on the assumption that rather than writing your own accounting system, which used to be a thing for decades, they managed to convince, and line of business owners and IT was instrumental in promoting the idea of telling internal finance departments in a variety of companies that if you're willing to give up on your preconceived notion that you're different and that there are standard things that you can have tomorrow that we know work really, really well, so you can have it tomorrow or soon, and it'll work very reliably and it's constantly being updated. Let's use SAP. Or if you had your own customer relationship management system. Promotion has been highly successful in getting you to accept using either Microsoft Dynamics CRM or Salesforce.com as your customer relationship management system of record when you might have wanted to build something custom of your own, because you can have it quickly and you know it will work. It's been endorsed by other people and been shown to be useful. Promotion has actually got a lot of people to do a lot less customization and a whole lot more adoption and reuse. And promotion has been instrumental in making that happen.
Ooh, performance.
Performance.
Such a big topic, huh?
Yes, it is a very big topic.
Well, performance, yes, a big topic
yes.
in
So when
governance.
you were thinking about performance 15 years ago, what did you think performance was?
Well, obviously, in the past, when we tried to optimize the performance, to put some best practices around our servers, workflows. What we try to do is we try to focus on the technology. So we try to follow all the best practices in terms of the server resources, CPU, RAM, network connections. We try to monitor our systems in terms of every time I identify a bottleneck in my CPU system, we try to give more resources. So we try to focus on the technology and provide the best technology that we can have for our workflow solutions.
All right, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
But over the last 15 years or more, I've learned something. Computational power is cheap compared to human power. Or more to the point, let's just look at this a different way. Obsessing over the amount of time it takes to get through a loop, or how long it takes to transport data from one place to another, or whether you should do it in huge batches or small incremental atomic operations. It's not that we don't care about that. It's that the effort that we put into that doesn't mean a thing if we get the amount of time it takes to move data from point A to point B down to half a second. Doesn't matter. You know why? Because who am I going to pick on? I'll pick on you again just because I know Chris, it'll be all right. He's not going to be mad at me later. Okay, if you did all that great work to get all the computational and data transfer stuff down to half a second, or half a second, or even half a minute,
yep.
Doesn't matter. It's going to take him 2 days to approve the proposal you just auto-generated. Yep. Why? Because A, he's out of the office. B, when he comes back, he's got a lot of email to deal with. C, this might be complicated, so he's going to mark it to be done later. And D, it takes him a while to get something done. He's a wonderful man, but sometimes he procrastinates. So anyway.
You forgot the hangover too.
Forgot about the hangover. Yes, that's a very important thing that could get in the way of him getting this finished. So, the important thing is, none of this means anyone's a bad person. It does, however, mean that when you are optimizing a workflow process, the rules are different. Workflows are not visual programs. Workflows are different from that. They share things in common with code, but they're not code done in pictures. They factor in human issues. In fact, you know something? I might spend a whole lot less time obsessing over how to move the data back and forth in the most efficient way, and a whole lot more time coming up with making his life as easy as possible so that he can finish that task in fewer than 2 days. Like maybe the email alert I send you has got all the details in it. In fact, I might send this to you as a text so that you just have to reply to the text message with yes or no. And then we can all continue to go on about our business. We do, in Nintex, if you're doing this over email, it's called lazy approval. But if you're doing it well in email, you're making sure that the lazy approval notification message contains all the information about the choice to be made, rather than just a link to click on to see what it is you have to approve. And if you use Nintex Forms, we do that automatically. But if you're doing it in an email notice, then you need to do a little bit of that work yourself. It also pays off if you decide to reach somebody over a chat bot in Skype for Business or something to that effect. But doing things to reduce human wait times is it's a far better use of your time than that. And so one of the things we do when doing oversight on people's stuff is we will forgive technical inelegance if things have been done to maximize human throughput. That should be that's actually a governance rule for the governors as much as it is a governance rule for the designers.
Yeah, a couple of examples of the features or the technology that we can use for this. Nintex Hawkeye, that probably most of you have seen before coming to InspireX, or you should. If not, I think Luke Bongiorno's session was just before this one. Mm-hmm. Well, we can use Nintex Hawkeye to get all the analytics of our workflows. And in this case, in this expense claim process, We can identify the different stages of the whole process, and then we can see which stage of the process is taking more time. And then we can focus on that stage. So if we are seeing here that the manager approval stage is taking more than usual, then rather than, as Mike was saying, rather than focusing on the technology, the performance of our service, we can go to the workflow design, or we can have a look at how we are doing this stage in our workflow.
We can talk to some managers, figure out why they're taking so long. Because I can't believe executives are more efficient than managers. Usually gets less efficient the higher up the food chain.
Yep.
Could be wrong. Don't think so.
Or talking about the lazy approval.
Yes.
Everybody knows what lazy approval is?
Yeah.
Well, lazy approval is a feature that is great, but it's useless if we cannot bring all the relevant information to the notification. It's great that I can just reply, it's great that I can just reply to the email saying yes or no to approve this task. But if I don't have all the information in the task notification, I cannot take the decision. If I need to approve a task, if I need to approve a leave request, and I don't have the information of the user who is requesting the leave request, how many days he's requesting, in which period of time, and so on, I cannot take that decision. So the most important thing is the information that we are bringing to that task notification. And then we can use the technology. We can say, I'm going to use lazy approval. I'm going to reply directly to this email and get it done. That's the couple of examples that we can use.
Cool. Well, let's see. What else can we talk about? We talked about actually related to performance.
Yep.
In fact, you know something? If you go right back, because you're analyzing a process right there, right?
Yep.
All right. Design standards. Get ready to go to the stage view of the whole thing. We'll come right back to this in a minute. But when we talk about design standards, possibly I'm going to jump right to where we are now, just because we've got 8 minutes left, and I just want to make sure that we hit this. So yes, once upon a time we wanted to make sure that there was technical elegance and everything else. When we talk about design standards, probably the #1 governance rule for governors when reviewing, we've already said it's important to review other activities and teach people to make better workflows, and that's the most effective way to govern. Okay, one of the most important things to teach people to do is to make those workflows understandable. It's more important than making them elegant. It's more important than making them fast. Again, if you make it understandable, it can be changed later on, and you're always going to want it to change it later on. An understandable workflow is a manipulable workflow, and in fact, if you are, my guess is, Chris, I was picking on you before, so let me build you up here right now. Normally, when you go into an organization and sit amongst them and build a workflow for someone, you still need to get, even if you've gotten to the point where you're embedded within a group and you feel their pain and think like they do and build a workflow for them like they build, they all have someone else up above them that needs to approve their work, right? Or say that, yes, this is acceptable to me. Whether they feel the pain, they still have to say yes or no. Maybe because they've got the money. My guess is, if your workflow is wonderful, but that guy is never or gal is never going to understand it, you're going to have a bad time. Would that be a correct assessment? It is fair. Thank you. So the point is, you need to make the design easy to understand. And you've got some examples here, right?
Yeah, I just picked a couple of examples.
What do you got?
This workflow is very well designed, no problem with that. But in my opinion, it's too technical. So here we are setting up.
It's actually not that bad. This workflow is designed to route
it has an state
if you want a budget variance, if you need to get discretionary funds added to your budget for an unforeseen new project that occurs during the fiscal year, you need to route it up several levels of approval. Well, this workflow actually checks a database of who are known approvers for different cost centers and what's their approval limit. And it keeps walking up the chain until it gets all the approval until it reaches somebody. It gets approval at multiple levels, and it stops when it finally reaches somebody who has an approval level that's high enough. But you always gather approvals along the way as you move up. Now, that concept is easy, but if I just show this workflow to somebody, they're not going to figure that out.
Yeah,
You've got a far easier workflow to look at, right?
Yeah, for example, the press release workflow.
Right, and we could have made the other one work this way too if we knew how many levels in the organizational chain there were. So having a little bit more information about the company would have let us make a workflow that looks closer to this, where a workflow goes between a review by management, by legal, by publishing, and at any point it might go back to the author for revisions and then restart the cycle and so on. But you can see immediately that it's going to move from author to manager to legal to publishing, and it could get reset at any point in time. I need about 15 seconds to walk somebody through that one. I need 5 minutes or more to walk them through the previous one. That makes this a happier experience. In truth, they have about an equal amount of design of technical complexity to them, but that one's easier to understand.
Yep. What else do we have?
Okay. Metrics.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so we've got 3 minutes. So how about I just put it this way? Best practices. There's only one way to determine what a best practice is, and you can either enforce best practices or promote best practices. It depends on your company's culture. But the only way you get to a best practice is to have practices, more than one. And then you look at the one that's best, and that one's your best practice. So in other words, we're not going to give you NWC best practices yet because NWC is a relatively new thing, and we need to watch a lot of people use it before we come up with recommendations on how it works best. We can give you ideas we like or practices we're fond of, but we can't know they're best until we measure them. And you've got examples of how to get that done with Hawkeye, right?
Yeah, so we need to take decisions. We need to base our decisions on something, on some metrics. And with Nintex Hawkeye, we can find 3 different custom actions. So if we need to identify if this stage of the process is taking too much, we can use these 2 beacons to have more or less the indication of how long is it taking. Or if I need to take more information, I can just use the general beacon and extract the metric of that process. If I need to be what the department is, what the manager of that person is.
Why don't we distill this down as to why that's important? Just think about it like this. If you make people, or if you strongly encourage people as one of the best practices to mark up their workflows with beacons. And a beacon just says, it does 1 or 2 things. It either says, at this point, I'm going to feed Hawkeye some information about what's going on. I emit some data. You can just have a normal beacon, or you can say, I am entering a stage, and here's some data, and I'm ending a stage, and here's some data. I actually prefer that approach. We let you do it either way, but if you do it the way we're talking about, if you go to Hawkeye now and look at that stage view,
yep.
This is a big workflow with a lot of steps going on, but it can be reduced to something that looks like that. And if we say, okay, how often does the workflow, these are metrics on how long it takes, but if we go back to the previous one that you just had open with that jump from one stage to another, was the first thing we saw when you flipped around. Maybe you just hit yeah, that's it, okay. If I get it down to this, I don't need to teach you the entire model. I can say, when we move from this level to that level and that level, we can even color code the stuff to show that it's red if it's taking too long, or green if it's taking the exact amount, or if it's nice and fast, et cetera, et cetera. I can reduce this to something that basically lets us say, good, or bad. Or go, good, except that part bad. And that helps us out a lot. But we don't get this unless we're willing to provide it. So encouraging people and saying that a standard policy ought to be, when you build your workflows, think about how they're going to be analyzed to figure out whether they're working well. And in fact, one of the things we will be able to do at some point in Hawkeye is test how well a workflow works from version to version. So when you build version 1.0, and if you use the same stage beacons, emit that stuff. And then 2 or 3 versions later, if you're emitting the same data and the same beacons, even if you've rearranged the way the workflow works, you can check to see how well the work involved took. And by the way, that's not just a way to get good workflows, that's a good way to show how good you're doing or how well you're doing your job. It's wonderful to do a wonderful workflow project, and then at the end of the year when it comes time for your review, someone says, well, what did you do? Well, I did something that saved us a ton of money. Well, I didn't see the money that we lost. Basically, you stopped something bad from happening, but I'm not sure it ever would have happened. Well, you can prove it if you've collected this data over a period of time.
Yeah.
And with that, final point to make before we say thank you and ask you to evaluate us is evolution.
Yeah, more or less evolution is the conclusion of everything that we have seen. We need to take into consideration that our organization will be changing, and so as our processes. So if I'm designing now a workflow, I will design it based on the current circumstances.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add 15 years later is to say that at a certain point, if it isn't broken, try to break it. In the sense of, don't deliberately destroy a process just because you can, but what you might want to do is, as a matter of policy, as a matter of risk reduction, as a matter of exploring opportunities for improvement, a policy that you could have in place for governance purposes is to say that everything gets looked at once a year. Like once a year after it was deployed, check to see whether it can be or should be revised. Mandate that whoever owns the process goes and looks at the beacon data being emitted into Hawkeye and says, we wish it were better than that, and then examines the workflow design to see if it can be improved. And with that, in conclusion, thank you very, very much. I'd actually say that Gonzalo asked me to help deliver this, but he's the principal architect of the session and deserves most of the credit for this.